The blood on Sarah Grayson's wedding dress had long since dried to a rust-brown stain, but she could still see it every time she closed her eyes, still feel the weight of her dying husband in her arms as the stagecoach robbery had torn her world apart just 3 hours after they had spoken their vows. Now, 6 months later in the autumn of 1876, she stood at the edge of Lewiston, Idaho territory, with nothing but a worn carpetbag and a heart that felt like shattered glass in her chest. The dusty main street stretched before her, lined with weathered wooden buildings that seemed to lean against each other for support. Miners, ranchers, and drifters moved along the boardwalks, their boots echoing against the planks. Sarah pulled her shawl tighter around her shoulders, feeling the weight of curious glances from passers-by. A woman traveling alone always drew attention, especially one whose eyes carried the kind of sorrow that seemed to age her beyond her 22 years. She had come to Lewiston because her late husband Thomas had a cousin here, a woman named Margaret who ran a boarding house. It was the only connection Sarah had left to anything resembling family. Her own parents had died of fever when she was 16, and Thomas's parents had made it clear at the funeral that they blamed her somehow for their son's death, as if her presence in that stagecoach had summoned the bandits who had shot him when he tried to protect her. The boarding house was easy enough to find, a 2-story structure painted a fading yellow with white trim. Sarah climbed the steps to the porch, her legs trembling from exhaustion and hunger. She had spent the last of her money on the stagecoach fare from Boise, gambling everything on the hope that Margaret would remember her, would show her some kindness. Margaret did remember her, but kindness proved to be in short supply. The woman who answered the door was thin and sharp-featured, with gray hair pulled back so tightly it seemed to stretch her skin. Her eyes swept over Sarah with an appraising look that felt more like an assessment of goods than a greeting of family. "Sarah," Margaret said flatly. "I heard about Thomas. Terrible business." "Thank you, Margaret. I was hoping perhaps you might have room for me here. I can work for my keep. I am good with cooking and cleaning, and I can sew." Margaret's lips pressed into a thin line. "I have all the help I need. The boarding house is barely profitable as it is. I cannot afford charity cases." The word stung like a slap, but Sarah had learned in recent months that grief made you vulnerable, and the world had little patience for vulnerability. "I understand. Perhaps you might know of someone in town who needs help. Any kind of work would do." For a moment, Margaret seemed ready to close the door entirely. Then she paused, her expression shifting to something that might have been calculation. "There is one possibility. Robert Morrison has a ranch about 5 miles north of town. He lost his housekeeper a month ago when she moved to California with her daughter. He has been asking around for someone to cook and keep house. The pay is decent, and he provides room and board. Is he a good man?" Sarah asked, needing to know if she would be trading one danger for another. Margaret shrugged. "He keeps to himself mostly. Lost his wife 4 years ago and has not remarried. Some say he is too harsh, too set in his ways. Others say he is fair but expects hard work. I cannot speak to his character personally, but I have heard no scandal attached to his name. He comes to town once a week for supplies and pays his bills promptly. That is more than can be said for most." It was not exactly a ringing endorsement, but Sarah had few options. "How might I find this ranch?" "Take the north road past the mill. You will see a sign for the Morrison Ranch. It is a good-sized spread. You cannot miss it." Margaret started to close the door, then paused. "A word of advice. Morrison is looking for a housekeeper, nothing more. Do not get ideas above your station." Sarah felt heat rise in her cheeks, though whether from embarrassment or anger she could not quite say. "I am a widow, Margaret. I am not looking for a husband. I am looking for honest work." Good. See that you remember that. The door closed with a decisive click. Sarah stood on the porch for a long moment, fighting back tears of frustration and exhaustion. She refused to cry in the middle of town where everyone could see. Instead, she walked back down the steps and made her way toward the general store. If she was going to walk 5 miles to a strange ranch, she needed to at least have some water for the journey. The storekeeper, a kindly older man with a white beard, took pity on her when she explained her situation. He filled her canteen without charge and threw in a piece of cornbread wrapped in cloth. "Morrison is a good man," he told her. "Lost his wife to consumption. It near about killed him too, losing her like that. He threw himself into the ranch work, building it up from nothing. But a ranch is not the same as a home, if you take my meaning. He needs someone to remind him of that." Sarah thanked him and set out on the north road, grateful for the man's kindness but uncertain about what awaited her. The afternoon sun was warm despite the autumn chill in the air, and the road stretched out before her, winding through golden grasslands dotted with pine trees. In the distance, mountains rose against the impossibly blue sky, their peaks already touched with snow. The walk gave her too much time to think, too much time to remember. Thomas had been a gentle man, a clerk in a law office in Denver with dreams of starting his own practice someday. They had known each other for only 4 months before he proposed, but it had felt right, felt safe. He had promised her a good life, a home filled with children and laughter. Instead, she had gotten 6 weeks of awkward newlywed fumbling, and then a bullet meant for someone else that had torn through his chest and ended everything. Sarah pushed the memories away, focusing instead on the landscape around her. The Idaho Territory was beautiful in a wild, untamed way that was so different from the settled streets of Denver. There was space here, room to breathe, room to start over if she was brave enough to try. The Morrison Ranch appeared as the storekeeper had promised, impossible to miss. A wooden sign marked the entrance to a long drive that led to a sturdy ranch house built of logs and stone. Outbuildings dotted the property, including a large barn, a stable, and what looked like a bunkhouse for ranch hands. Cattle grazed in distant pastures, and she could see a few horses in a corral near the barn. As she walked up the drive, a man emerged from the barn, wiping his hands on his trousers. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with dark hair that needed cutting and several days' worth of stubble on his jaw. His clothes were work-worn but clean, and he moved with the easy confidence of a man comfortable in his own space. "Help you," he called out, his voice carrying across the yard. Sarah stopped a respectful distance away. "I am looking for Robert Morrison. I was told he might need a housekeeper." The man walked closer, and Sarah could see his eyes were a striking blue-gray, like storm clouds over the mountains. His face was weathered by sun and wind, with lines around his eyes that spoke of hard work and harder years. She guessed him to be somewhere in his early 30s. "I am Morrison," he said, looking her over with frank assessment. "You do not look like any housekeeper I have ever seen." Sarah lifted her chin, refusing to be cowed. "I am stronger than I look. I can cook, clean, do laundry, mend clothes, and manage a household. I am a hard worker and I do not complain. Where are you from?" "Denver originally. I came here today from Boise." "That is a long way to travel for a housekeeping job. Why Lewiston?" Sarah had known this question would come, and she had debated how much to reveal. In the end, she settled for a version of the truth. "My husband died 6 months ago. I have no family left in Denver. His cousin lives in Lewiston, but she cannot take me in. The storekeeper in town told me you were looking for help." Morrison studied her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. "I am sorry for your loss. How old are you?" 22. Any children? The question hit like a physical blow, but Sarah kept her voice steady. No, can you start immediately? Yes, Morrison nodded slowly. The pay is $30 a month plus room and board. You will have your own room in the main house. I expect 3 meals a day, the house kept clean, laundry done weekly, and mending as needed. I have 4 ranch hands who eat breakfast and dinner here. Lunch they take with them in the fields. I do not tolerate drinking, stealing, or laziness. If you do your job well, you will be treated fairly. If you do not, you will be let go. Are these terms acceptable? $30 a month was more than generous for housekeeping work. Sarah felt a wave of relief so intense it made her dizzy. Yes, very acceptable. Thank you, Mr. Morrison. Call me Robert. Mr. Morrison was my father. He gestured toward the house. Come on, I will show you your room and the kitchen. Supper needs to be on the table in 3 hours. Think you can manage that? Yes, I can manage that. The ranch house was larger than it had appeared from the outside, with a main room that served as both kitchen and dining area, a separate parlor, and 4 bedrooms upstairs. Robert showed her to a small but clean room at the back of the house with a narrow bed, a dresser, and a window that looked out over the barn and pastures beyond. The previous housekeeper left some things behind, Robert said, opening the dresser to reveal a few basic items of clothing. They might fit you. If not, I can advance you some pay to buy what you need in town. Thank you. That is very kind. He shrugged uncomfortably as if unused to being called kind. The kitchen is well stocked. I do my shopping in town every Saturday. If you need anything special, make a list. The ranch hands are good men, but they are used to rough living. They will test you at first, see if you are easily rattled. Do not let them push you around. I will not, Sarah promised. Robert lingered in the doorway for a moment, seeming like he wanted to say something else. Finally, he just nodded and left, his boots heavy on the wooden stairs. Sarah sat on the bed, feeling the tension drain from her body all at once. She had a job, a place to stay, and a chance to rebuild some kind of life. It was more than she had dared hope for when she had arrived in Lewiston that morning. She allowed herself 5 minutes to rest, then got to work. The kitchen was indeed well stocked, with a good supply of flour, beans, salt pork, potatoes, and various other staples. She found a larder with eggs, butter, and fresh vegetables that must have come from a garden somewhere on the property. There was even a pie safe with half an apple pie inside, though it looked several days old and rather sad. Sarah decided on a simple but hearty supper: fried salt pork, beans flavored with onions and molasses, cornbread, and boiled potatoes with butter. She worked quickly and efficiently, falling into the familiar rhythms of cooking she had learned from her mother. It felt good to have something to do with her hands, something to focus on besides the endless churning of her thoughts. The ranch hands came in just as she was setting the food on the table. They were a rough-looking bunch, as Robert had warned, ranging in age from a young man who could not have been more than 19 to a grizzled veteran who looked to be past 50. They stopped short when they saw her, exchanging glances. "Who are you?" the oldest one asked, not unkindly. "Sarah Grayson. I am the new housekeeper." "About time," the youngest one said with a grin. "We have been eating Robert's cooking for a month. Man cannot cook worth a damn." "That is enough, Tommy," Robert said, coming in from outside. His hair was damp, and Sarah realized he had washed up at the pump in the yard. "Sit down and be respectful, or you can go back to the bunkhouse and make your own supper." The men sat quickly, though Tommy was still grinning. They filled their plates with appreciation, and for a few minutes the only sound was the scrape of forks and appreciative chewing. Sarah stood by the stove, uncertain whether she should sit with them or eat later. "Sit down," Robert said, nodding to an empty chair. "You are not a servant. You are an employee. You eat with the rest of us." Sarah sat, grateful but still feeling awkward under the curious gazes of the men. The oldest one, who introduced himself as Henry, asked her polite questions about where she was from and how she had ended up in Idaho. She gave brief, carefully edited answers, and the men were gentlemen enough not to push for more. "This is the best meal I have had in a month," Henry said when his plate was clean. "You are a fine cook, Miss Grayson." "Thank you. I am glad you enjoyed it." The men helped clear the table without being asked, which surprised Sarah. They seemed to genuinely respect Robert, following his lead in treating her with courtesy. When the kitchen was clean, the ranch hands headed to the bunkhouse, and Robert retreated to his study to work on his account books, leaving Sarah alone in the kitchen. She made herself a cup of tea and sat by the window, watching the sun set over the mountains. The sky turned brilliant shades of orange and pink, then deepened to purple and finally black, scattered with more stars than she had ever seen in her life. It was beautiful and peaceful, and for the first time in months, Sarah felt something other than crushing grief. It was not happiness exactly, but it was the absence of constant pain, and that was enough for now. Over the next few weeks, Sarah settled into the rhythm of ranch life. She woke before dawn to prepare breakfast, packed lunches for the men heading out to work, spent the day cleaning and mending and preparing for the next meal. It was hard work, but it was honest work, and she found satisfaction in it. The house began to look cared for again, with clean curtains on the windows and fresh flowers on the table when she could find them. Robert was a fair employer, as Margaret had said, but he was also distant and reserved. He spoke little at meals, mostly listening to the ranch hands discuss the day's work. He was patient with Tommy, the youngest hand who was still learning, and he valued Henry's experience and judgment. But he kept himself apart somehow, as if there was a wall around him that no one was allowed to breach. Sarah found herself watching him sometimes when she thought he would not notice. There was a sadness in him that mirrored her own, a sense of loss that he carried like a weight on his shoulders. She wondered about his wife, the woman who had died of consumption 4 years ago. There were no pictures of her in the house, no obvious mementos. It was as if Robert had scrubbed away all evidence of her existence, but the emptiness she had left behind was palpable. One evening in late October, Sarah was in the kitchen preparing supper when Robert came in from the barn. He stopped in the doorway, watching her work for a moment before speaking. "Sarah, can I talk to you for a moment?" She turned, wiping her hands on her apron. "Of course." He seemed uncomfortable, shifting his weight from one foot to the other. "I wanted to say that you have done an excellent job these past few weeks. The house has not looked this good in years, and the men are very happy with the food. I am pleased I hired you." "Thank you, Robert. I am grateful for the opportunity." He nodded, then seemed to struggle with something else he wanted to say. Finally, he blurted out, "Would you like to come to town with me on Saturday? You mentioned needing some personal items, and I thought you might like to do your own shopping rather than giving me a list." Sarah was surprised by the invitation, but it made practical sense. "Yes, I would like that. Thank you. We will leave at first light. It is about an hour's ride by wagon." That Saturday, Sarah woke even earlier than usual to prepare a cold breakfast the men could serve themselves. She dressed in her best dress, which was not saying much given her limited wardrobe, and met Robert in the yard just as the sun was peeking over the mountains. The wagon ride to Lewiston was pleasant, despite the chill in the morning air. Robert was more talkative than usual, pointing out landmarks and telling her about the history of the area. He spoke about how he had come to Idaho Territory 8 years ago with his wife Elizabeth, how they had started the ranch with nothing but determination and a small inheritance from his family back in Missouri. "We had plans," he said, his voice growing quiet. "We were going to build something lasting, something to pass down to our children. But then Elizabeth got sick, and nothing I did could save her. The doctor said her lungs were too weak, that the harsh winters here made it worse. I tried taking her to California for a few months, but it was too late. She died on the journey back." "I am so sorry," Sarah said softly. "Losing someone you love is the hardest thing in the world." Robert glanced at her, and for the first time she saw something break through his usual reserve. "Your husband, how did he die?" Sarah had not told anyone the full story, but something about the quiet mourning and Robert's openness made her want to share. "We were married in Denver on a Saturday morning in April. It was a small ceremony, just us and a few friends. We were taking the stagecoach to Colorado Springs for a brief wedding trip. About 20 miles outside Denver, we were held up by bandits. Thomas tried to protect me. He stood up to them, tried to reason with them. One of the bandits shot him. He died in my arms before the driver could even get us back to Denver. God, Sarah, I am so sorry. The worst part was that we had been married for only 3 hours. 3 hours, and then he was gone. Sometimes I wonder if the whole thing was a dream, if we were ever really married at all." It went by so fast. Robert was quiet for a long moment, the only sound the creak of the wagon wheels and the steady clip-clop of the horses' hooves. Finally, he said, "Grief is a strange thing. Sometimes I can go for days without thinking about Elizabeth, and then something small will trigger a memory, and it is like losing her all over again. Does it get better, or do we just get better at hiding it? I do not know," Sarah admitted, "but I think maybe we learn to carry it differently. The weight does not lessen, but we get stronger." That is a good way to look at it. They spent the morning in Lewiston, with Robert conducting his business at the feed store and the bank while Sarah shopped for a few necessities. She bought fabric to make herself 2 new dresses, some personal items she had needed, and ingredients for a special supper she wanted to make. Robert insisted on buying her a warm coat when he saw her looking at one, brushing aside her protests. "Winter comes hard and fast here," he said firmly. "You need a proper coat. Consider it part of your wages." They had lunch at a small restaurant on Main Street, where several people stopped by to greet Robert and Sarah with curiosity. She could practically hear the rumors starting, could see the speculation in people's eyes. Robert seemed oblivious to it, or perhaps he was just used to being the subject of small-town gossip. On the ride back to the ranch, Sarah felt more relaxed than she had in months. Robert was easy company when he chose to open up, and she found herself laughing at a story he told about Tommy accidentally letting all the chickens out of the coop and spending an entire afternoon chasing them around the property. "He means well," Robert said with a smile that transformed his usually serious face. "But sometimes I wonder if his head is full of sawdust instead of brains. He is young. He will learn. He is lucky to have a patient teacher in Henry. That old cowboy has forgotten more about ranching than most men ever learn." As they approached the ranch, Sarah felt something shift between them. It was subtle, barely noticeable, but it was there. A foundation of trust, perhaps, or the beginning of friendship. Whatever it was, it made her feel less alone, and that was a precious thing. November brought the first real snow, coating the ranch in a blanket of white that transformed the landscape into something magical and treacherous all at once. The work became harder, with ice to break on the water troughs and paths to shovel clear. Sarah learned to bake extra bread and keep large pots of stew simmering on the stove, so the men would always have something hot to eat when they came in from the cold. Robert began spending more time in the house, working on repairs that needed doing before winter set in fully. He fixed a loose board on the porch, replaced some cracked window panes, and repaired a leak in the roof over Sarah's room. She found herself looking forward to these projects, to the sound of him working nearby, to the brief conversations they shared when he came in for coffee, or to warm his hands by the stove. One evening in mid-November, Sarah was in the parlor mending one of Robert's shirts when he came in from checking on the livestock. He stood in the doorway for a moment, just watching her work in the lamplight, and when she looked up, there was an expression on his face that made her breath catch. "Sarah, I have been thinking," he began, then stopped, seeming to struggle with how to continue. "I have been thinking that maybe it is time I started living again instead of just existing. Elizabeth has been gone for 4 years. I have been telling myself that I am honoring her memory by keeping to myself, by focusing only on the ranch. But I think maybe I have just been hiding." Sarah set down her mending, giving him her full attention. "What changed your mind? You did," he said simply. "These past few months, watching you put the pieces of your life back together, seeing your strength and your grace even after everything you have been through. It made me realize that I have been a coward. I have been letting fear of more loss keep me from truly living." "You are not a coward, Robert. You are one of the bravest men I know." He crossed the room and sat in the chair across from her, leaning forward with his elbows on his knees. "I know this is sudden, and I do not want to make you uncomfortable. But I need you to know that I have come to care for you. More than I should, probably, given that you work for me. I find myself thinking about you constantly, looking for excuses to be near you. If I am completely out of line, tell me now, and we will never speak of this again." Sarah's heart was pounding so hard she was sure he could hear it. She had been trying not to acknowledge her own growing feelings for Robert, telling herself it was inappropriate, that she was still in mourning, that she was being foolish. But hearing him voice what she had been feeling made it impossible to deny any longer. "You are not out of line," she said quietly. "I have been feeling the same way, but I did not think I had the right to feel anything. It has only been 6 months since Thomas died." "What kind of widow falls for another man so quickly?" "The kind who deserves to be happy again," Robert said firmly. "Sarah, I am not asking you to forget your husband or to rush into anything. I just needed you to know how I feel. We can take this as slow as you need. We can just be friends if that is all you are ready for. I just could not keep it inside anymore." Sarah felt tears prick at her eyes, but they were not tears of sadness. "I would like to see where this goes, if you are willing to be patient with me. I am still healing, still figuring out who I am without Thomas. But I care for you too, Robert, more than I thought I could care for anyone again." He reached across the space between them and took her hand, his palm warm and rough with calluses. "I can be patient. I am good at waiting." They sat like that for a long time, hands clasped, not needing words. Outside, the snow continued to fall, blanketing the world in silence. Inside, something new and fragile and precious was beginning to grow. The weeks that followed were sweet and tentative. Robert courted Sarah in small, old-fashioned ways. He brought her wildflowers he found on the property, preserved despite the cold. He carved her a wooden comb during long evenings when the ranch work was done. He read to her from books in his study, his deep voice bringing stories to life in the lamplight. He asked her opinion on ranch matters, valuing her intelligence and insight. Sarah found herself opening up in ways she had not expected. She told Robert about her childhood, about her parents, and the life they had built before fever took them. She told him about her fears and hopes, about the dreams she had put away when Thomas died. Robert listened with a patience and attention that made her feel truly seen for the first time in her life. The ranch hands noticed the change between them, of course. Henry smiled knowingly, but said nothing. Tommy teased Robert mercilessly until a stern look from his boss shut him up. But there was a general sense of approval, a feeling that the house was becoming a home again. As Christmas approached, Sarah threw herself into preparations. She made wreaths from pine boughs to hang on the doors. She baked cookies and cakes, filling the house with the scents of cinnamon and sugar. She even talked Robert into bringing in a small tree, which they decorated with strings of popcorn and paper ornaments she made by hand. On Christmas Eve, after the ranch hands had retired to the bunkhouse for their own celebration, Robert and Sarah sat by the fire in the parlor. Robert handed her a small package wrapped in brown paper. "It is not much," he said, looking almost shy, "but I wanted you to have something." Sarah unwrapped the package carefully to find a beautiful silver locket on a delicate chain. She opened it to find a tiny, perfect engraving inside, two birds in flight, their wings overlapping. "Robert, it is beautiful, but this must have cost a fortune." "You are worth it," he said simply. "I had the jeweler in Lewiston make it special. The birds are sparrows. They mate for life, and they are stronger together than they are apart. That is what I hope for us, Sarah, to be stronger together." Sarah felt tears spill down her cheeks as Robert fastened the locket around her neck. Then, slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, he leaned in and kissed her. It was gentle and sweet, full of promise and hope and the patience he had shown her from the beginning. When they finally pulled apart, Sarah was smiling through her tears. "I love you, Robert Morrison. I did not think I could love again, but you have shown me that my heart is not as broken as I thought. I love you too, Sarah Grayson, more than I can put into words." They sat by the fire until late into the night, talking and dreaming about the future. Robert spoke about his plans for expanding the ranch, about breeding better cattle and horses. Sarah talked about wanting to plant a big garden in the spring, about turning the unused room downstairs into a proper library. They talked about everything and nothing, two people who had found each other against all odds. When the new year arrived, Robert made his intentions clear. On a cold January morning, he asked Sarah to marry him. There was no grand gesture, no elaborate plan. They were in the barn together, Sarah having come to bring him a hot lunch, when he simply turned to her and said, "Marry me, Sarah. Make this house a home. Make me a better man. I promise I will spend every day trying to make you happy." Sarah did not hesitate. "Yes, yes, I will marry you." They married in March, when the first hints of spring were beginning to show. It was a simple ceremony in the parlor of the ranch house, with Henry standing as Robert's best man and the other ranch hands as witnesses. The justice of the peace from Lewiston performed the service, and Sarah wore a new dress she had sewn herself in a soft blue that Robert said matched the sky. There was no elaborate wedding trip, no grand celebration. They had a nice supper with the ranch hands, and then Robert carried Sarah over the threshold into the bedroom that had been his alone for so long. He was gentle and patient with her, and if she cried afterward, they were tears of healing, not sorrow. The spring and summer passed in a blur of hard work and quiet happiness. Sarah proved to be not just a good housekeeper, but a true partner in running the ranch. She learned to keep the account books, to manage the household budget, to negotiate with suppliers in town. Robert came to rely on her judgment, discussing important decisions with her before making them. The ranch prospered under their joint management, and word spread that Morrison Ranch was a good place to work, fair and prosperous. But as the summer turned to fall, Sarah began to notice that something was troubling Robert. He grew quieter, more withdrawn. She would catch him watching children playing in town with an expression of such longing it broke her heart. She knew what he wanted, what any man in his position would want. He wanted children, heirs to carry on the ranch he had built. And that was the one thing Sarah could not give him. She had known for years, since before she married Thomas, that something was wrong. A childhood illness had left scars that the doctor said would prevent her from ever carrying a child. Thomas had accepted it, had said they would be enough for each other. But Sarah had seen the disappointment in his eyes, the loss of a dream he had never quite spoken aloud. Now, watching Robert's longing, knowing how much he would love to be a father, Sarah felt the weight of her secret pressing down on her. She had not told him before they married, had convinced herself it did not matter, that he had not asked, and so she was not obligated to tell. But she knew in her heart that she should have been honest with him. She knew she had to tell him now, before the silence between them became a lie too big to overcome. She chose a quiet evening in late October, almost exactly a year after she had first arrived at the ranch. The work was done, the house was clean, and they were alone in the parlor. Robert was reading the weekly newspaper from Boise while Sarah pretended to work on her embroidery. Finally, she set down her needle and thread, her hands trembling. "Robert, I need to tell you something. Something I should have told you before we married." He looked up immediately, concern flooding his face. "What is it? Are you sick? Are you leaving?" "No, nothing like that, but it is important and I need you to hear me out before you say anything." She took a deep breath, forcing herself to meet his eyes. "I cannot have children, Robert. I had an illness when I was 12, and the doctor said it damaged something inside me. I will never be able to give you babies, never be able to fill this house with the children you deserve." The words hung in the air between them, heavy and final. Sarah watched Robert's face, trying to read his expression. She saw surprise, then confusion, then something that might have been grief. But she also saw love, steady and strong, shining through everything else. "Why did you not tell me before?" he asked quietly. "I was afraid. Afraid you would not marry me if you knew, afraid I would lose you like I have lost everything else. I know that was wrong of me. I know I should have given you the choice. I am so sorry, Robert. If you want to end this marriage, I will understand. You deserve a wife who can give you everything you want." Robert set down his newspaper and crossed the room to kneel in front of Sarah's chair. He took her hands in his, holding them firmly. "Sarah, look at me." She forced herself to meet his eyes, bracing for rejection, for anger, for disappointment. Instead, she saw only love. "You remember what I said when I asked you to marry me," Robert said. "I asked you to make this house a home. I asked you to make me a better man. I did not ask you to give me children. Yes, I thought about it. Yes, I imagined what it would be like to have a son or daughter, but that was never the most important thing. You are the most important thing. Your love, your partnership, your presence in my life, those are what matter to me." "But I saw how you looked at the children in town," Sarah said, tears streaming down her face. "I saw the longing in your eyes. You want to be a father." "I would be lying if I said I had never thought about it," Robert admitted. "But Sarah, there are many ways to build a family. There are many ways to fill a home with love and laughter. If we cannot have children of our own, then we will find another way." "What do you mean?" Robert sat back on his heels, thinking. "There are children all over the West who need homes, orphans from the wagon trains that did not make it. Children whose parents died of disease or accident. Kids living on the streets in mining camps and boom towns. We have this big house, this prosperous ranch. We have love to give. If you are willing, we could open our home to children who need us. We could give them the family they have lost." Sarah stared at him, hope blooming in her chest like a spring flower breaking through snow. "Do you mean adopt children? As many as we can love and care for properly. We could start with one, see how it goes. But Sarah, I see no reason why this house could not be filled with children. They may not be born to us, but they will be ours in every way that matters. Then we will fill our home another way, Sarah whispered, the words feeling like a revelation, like permission to hope again. Then we will fill our home another way, Robert repeated, pulling her into his arms. I love you, Sarah Morrison. Not for what you can give me, but for who you are. We will build our family together, and it will be beautiful. They held each other for a long time, crying and laughing and making plans. The burden Sarah had been carrying for so long lifted, replaced by a sense of possibility she had never dared to imagine. Robert had not just accepted her truth, he had transformed it into something beautiful, something hopeful. The next Saturday, they went to town together to speak with the local minister. Reverend Talbot was a practical man who knew the realities of life in the Idaho territory. He listened to their request carefully, then nodded. There is an orphanage of sorts in Boise, he said. It is run by a woman named Mrs. Henderson. She takes in children whose parents have died or who can no longer care for them. She is always looking for good homes to place them in. I can write you a letter of introduction if you like. We would appreciate that, Robert said. We want to do this properly, make sure any child who comes to us is legally ours and protected. That is wise, Reverend Talbot said approvingly. Too many people take in children and treat them as unpaid labor. It sounds like you want to make a real family. We do, Sarah said firmly. We want children to love and raise, not workers. 2 weeks later, Sarah and Robert made the journey to Boise. It was a long trip, requiring an overnight stay at a hotel, but they were both too excited to care. Mrs. Henderson's establishment was a large house on the edge of town, echoing with the sounds of children's voices. Mrs. Henderson herself was a formidable woman in her 50s, with sharp eyes that seemed to see right through any pretense. She invited Robert and Sarah into her small office and interrogated them thoroughly about their motivations, their finances, their experience with children, and their vision for the future. I will not place children in homes where they will be mistreated or used, she said bluntly. I need to know that you understand the commitment you are making. Children, especially those who have experienced loss, need stability, love, and patience. They may come with problems, with grief, with fears. Are you prepared for that? We are, Sarah said. My husband and I have both experienced profound loss. We understand grief. We want to offer children a safe home, a family, and a future. Mrs. Henderson studied them for a long moment, then seemed to come to a decision. I have several children who need placement. Let me tell you about a few of them, and you can decide if any seem like a good fit. She described a variety of children of different ages and backgrounds. There was a sibling group of 3 whose parents had died in a mining accident. There was a teenage boy whose father had abandoned him. There were several younger children whose stories varied but whose need was the same. They needed a home. As Mrs. Henderson talked, Sarah found her attention drawn back again and again to one case in particular. A 7-year-old boy named Daniel whose parents had died of fever during a wagon train journey. The boy had no other family, and he had been with Mrs. Henderson for 6 months, quiet and withdrawn, struggling to adjust to his new reality. Can we meet Daniel? Sarah asked. Mrs. Henderson looked surprised but pleased. Of course. Let me fetch him. Daniel turned out to be a small boy with dark hair and enormous brown eyes that held far too much sadness for someone so young. He stood in the doorway of Mrs. Henderson's office, holding himself very still, as if bracing for bad news. Daniel, these are Mr. and Mrs. Morrison, Mrs. Henderson said gently. They have a ranch north of Lewiston, and they are looking to bring a child into their home. They wanted to meet you. Daniel's eyes flicked from Sarah to Robert and back again, assessing them with a wariness that broke Sarah's heart. Are you going to send me away to work? He asked in a small voice. No, Robert said firmly, crouching down so he was at eye level with the boy. "We are looking for a son, not a worker. We want someone to share our home with, to be part of our family. Would you like to hear about the ranch?" Daniel nodded slowly, and Robert proceeded to tell him about the cattle and horses, about the mountains and the river, about the room that could be his if he wanted it. Sarah watched the boy's face as Robert talked, seeing the longing there, the desperate hope that he was trying hard not to show. "We have dogs," Sarah added. "2 big ones that sleep by the fire, and there are chickens that need feeding every morning. The eggs are still warm when you collect them." "I like dogs," Daniel whispered. "We had a dog on the wagon train, but he got lost when my parents got sick." "Well, our dogs could always use another friend," Sarah said gently. "What do you think, Daniel? Would you like to come visit the ranch, see if you like it? There is no pressure. You can decide what you want." Daniel looked at Mrs. Henderson, who nodded encouragingly. "Can I really decide?" "Yes," Mrs. Henderson said. "This is your choice, Daniel. Mr. and Mrs. Morrison seem like good people, but you are the one who would have to live with them. If you want to visit, you can. If you do not like it there, we will find somewhere else for you." "I will think about it," Daniel said carefully, and Sarah realized he was a smart, cautious child who had learned to protect himself. They left Mrs. Henderson's office with Daniel's answer pending, but Sarah felt hopeful. As they walked back to their hotel, Robert took her hand. "That boy needs us," he said. "Did you see his eyes? He is scared to hope, but he wants to. He wants a family so badly he can taste it." "I know," Sarah said. "I felt the same way. Robert, I think he is the one. I know we just met him, but something about him just felt right." "I felt it too." "Let us see what Mrs. Henderson says tomorrow." The next morning, they returned to the orphanage to find Daniel waiting for them, a small bundle of belongings clutched in his arms. Mrs. Henderson was smiling. "Daniel has decided he would like to visit your ranch," she said. "He spent all night thinking about it, apparently. He asked me about 100 questions about you both." "What kinds of questions?" Robert asked. "Whether you were mean, whether you hit children, whether you would let him keep his mother's Bible." Normal questions for a child who has learned to be careful. Sarah knelt down in front of Daniel. "I promise you, we will never hit you. We will be fair, and we will expect you to work hard at your lessons and your chores, but we will never raise a hand to you in anger. And of course you can keep your mother's Bible. I still have things that belong to my parents too. They are precious." Daniel looked at her for a long moment, then nodded. "Okay, I will come visit." The journey back to Lewiston was long but filled with tentative conversations. Daniel sat between Sarah and Robert on the wagon bench, answering their questions in brief sentences, slowly relaxing as the miles passed. By the time they reached the ranch, he was actually smiling as Robert pointed out landmarks and features of the property. The ranch hands were surprised, but welcoming when Robert introduced Daniel as someone who would be staying with them for a while. Henry, in particular, seemed to take the boy under his wing immediately, showing him around the barn and introducing him to the horses. That first night, Sarah tucked Daniel into the small bedroom they had prepared for him, right next to the master bedroom. The boy looked very small in the big bed, clutching his bundle of belongings like a lifeline. "Mrs. Morrison," he said as she was about to blow out the lamp. "Yes, Daniel." "Are you going to send me back if I am bad?" Sarah sat on the edge of the bed, her heart aching. "Daniel, every child makes mistakes sometimes. If you break a rule or forget your chores, we will talk about it and you will have consequences. But we will never send you away for being a normal child. The only way you would have to leave is if you wanted to. Do you understand?" "I think so." "We want you here, Daniel. We want you to be part of our family. That is not going to change because you make a mistake or have a bad day." "What if I cry about my parents, Mrs.?" Henderson said some people do not like it when children cry. Sarah felt tears prick at her own eyes. Oh, sweetheart, you can cry whenever you need to. Your parents were taken from you in the worst possible way. That is worth crying about. I lost my parents too when I was not much older than you. I still cry sometimes when I miss them. Grief is not something to be ashamed of. Daniel looked at her with those big, solemn eyes. Did it get better? It got different, Sarah said honestly. The hurt does not go away completely, but you learn to carry it, and having people who love you helps. Having a home helps. Having a future to look forward to helps. I hope I get to stay here forever, Daniel whispered. So do I, Sarah said, kissing his forehead. So do I. Over the next few weeks, Daniel began to settle into ranch life. He was a bright, curious child who soaked up knowledge like a sponge. Robert taught him about the cattle and horses, about managing land and resources. Sarah taught him his letters and numbers, reading to him every night before bed. Henry taught him to ride and rope, patient with the boy's mistakes and generous with his praise. But it was not all smooth sailing. Daniel had nightmares that left him screaming in the dark, reliving the deaths of his parents. He had moments of intense grief where he would hide in the barn and cry for hours. He tested boundaries constantly, as if trying to find the line where Robert and Sarah would give up on him. They never gave up. When Daniel broke a window playing ball where he was not supposed to, Robert calmly explained why the rule existed and had him work off the cost of the repair by doing extra chores. When Daniel lied about finishing his schoolwork, Sarah gently but firmly made him tell the truth and then stay up late to complete what he had left undone. When Daniel shouted that he hated them and wanted to go back to Boise, they let him rage and then held him while he cried and apologized. "We are not going anywhere," Robert told him one night after a particularly difficult episode. "You are our son now, Daniel. That means we are with you through the good times and the bad times. We are a family and families stick together." "Even when I am bad?" Daniel asked in a small voice. "Even when you are bad. Although I have to say, you are not nearly as bad as you think you are. You are just a boy learning how to live in the world after something terrible happened to you. That is not being bad. That is being human." In December, Robert and Sarah officially adopted Daniel in a ceremony at the county courthouse. They all dressed in their best clothes, and Daniel signed his name carefully on the papers that made him legally theirs. Afterward, they had a celebration at the ranch with all the hands and some friends from town. Daniel was quiet but clearly happy, staying close to Sarah and Robert as if afraid they might disappear. "How does it feel to be Daniel Morrison?" Henry asked him as they cut into the cake Sarah had made. "It feels good," Daniel said with a shy smile. "It feels safe." As winter settled over the ranch, the three of them fell into a comfortable rhythm. Daniel thrived under the structure and love, his nightmares becoming less frequent, his smiles coming more easily. Sarah loved being a mother, loved the way Daniel would come to her with his questions and hurts, loved reading to him and teaching him and watching him grow. Robert was a natural father, patient and firm in equal measure. He took Daniel with him on his rounds of the ranch, teaching him everything he knew about land and animals and business. He played with him in the snow, teaching him to ice skate on the frozen pond. He sat with him during nightmares, his steady presence enough to chase away the worst of the fears. But as happy as Sarah was, she found herself thinking about all the other children like Daniel, all the other boys and girls who needed homes and love. One evening in January, after Daniel had gone to bed, she broached the subject with Robert. "I have been thinking," she said as they sat by the fire. "Daniel is doing so well. He is happy and he is thriving, and we have plenty of room in this house. What would you think about adopting another child?" Robert looked surprised, then thoughtful. Are you sure you are ready for that? Daniel has only been with us a few months. He still needs a lot of attention. I know. But I also know that having a brother or sister might be good for him. He needs to learn to share and to think about someone other than himself. And there are so many children who need homes, Robert. We have been blessed with so much. Should we not share that blessing? Robert smiled, that rare, beautiful smile that transformed his whole face. You have a huge heart, Sarah Morrison. All right. Let us talk to Mrs. Henderson again. But this time, I think we should let Daniel have some input. He will be the one sharing his home, after all. When they told Daniel about the possibility of adopting another child, his reaction surprised them. He was enthusiastic, almost desperate for a sibling. I was lonely before, he explained. On the wagon train, there were other kids to play with. At Mrs. Henderson's, there were lots of children. But here it is just me. I love it here, but sometimes I wish I had a brother or sister. What if the child is older than you? Sarah asked. Or what if it is a girl? Daniel thought about it seriously. I think that would be okay. As long as they are nice and they want to be part of our family. They made another trip to Boise in February, this time with Daniel in tow. Mrs. Henderson was delighted to see them and even more delighted to hear about Daniel's progress. When they explained that they were interested in adopting again, she immediately thought of someone. I have a girl, she said. Her name is Lucy. She is 10 years old. Her parents died in a fire last year and she has been with me ever since. She is a wonderful child, very bright and very kind, but she has been deeply affected by what she witnessed. She was the one who discovered the fire. She tried to save her parents but could not. The guilt she carries is enormous. Sarah felt her heart clench. We would like to meet her. Lucy turned out to be a tall, thin girl with blonde hair and blue eyes red-rimmed from too many tears. She held herself with a rigid control that Sarah recognized, the desperate need to keep everything locked down tight so nothing else could hurt her. Lucy, these are the people I told you about, Mrs. Henderson said gently. The Morrisons. They adopted Daniel a few months ago and they are looking to adopt another child. They thought you might like to meet them. Lucy's eyes went to Daniel, assessing him. Are they nice to you? She asked bluntly. Daniel nodded eagerly. They are the best. They let me help with the cattle and Mrs. Morrison teaches me reading and math and Mr. Morrison is teaching me to ride. And they do not get mad when I have bad dreams. You have bad dreams? Lucy asked softly. All the time. About when my parents died. Do you have them too? Yes. Every night. Sarah watched the two children look at each other, seeing something pass between them that needed no words. They understood each other in a way that even she and Robert, with all their love, could not quite manage. They had both lost their parents in traumatic ways. They both carried guilt and grief that was too heavy for their young shoulders. Lucy, Sarah said gently, we know you have been through something terrible. We know that no amount of love can erase what you saw, what you lost. But we would very much like to offer you a home if you want one. We have a ranch with space to run and breathe, with animals to care for, with people who will love you no matter what. We have Daniel, who clearly would like a sister. And we have room in our hearts for you. Why would you want me? Lucy asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I could not save my parents. I tried, but I was not strong enough. I am not worth saving. Robert crouched down in front of her chair, his voice firm but kind. Lucy, look at me. What happened to your parents was not your fault. You were a child trying to do the impossible. The fact that you tried at all shows how brave you are. You are absolutely worth saving, worth loving, worth every good thing this life has to offer. Please let us show you that. Lucy started to cry then, huge, wrenching sobs that shook her whole body. Sarah pulled her into her arms, and Daniel came over and took her hand, and Robert put his big hand on her back, and they let her cry until she had no more tears left. "I will try," Lucy finally whispered. "I will try to let you love me." "That is all we ask," Sarah said. Lucy came home with them that same day, bringing her few belongings and a deep well of pain that Sarah knew would take years to heal. But she also brought a quick intelligence, a dry sense of humor that emerged when she felt safe, and a deep capacity for love that she was scared to show but could not quite hide. The transition was harder than it had been with Daniel. Lucy was older, more aware of what she had lost, more resistant to accepting comfort. She had nightmares that woke the whole house, screaming about smoke and flames and the sound of her parents calling for help. She refused to go near the stove or fireplace for the first few weeks, panicking at the sight of open flames. But slowly, with patience and love and the steadying influence of Daniel, Lucy began to heal. She started helping Sarah in the kitchen, learning to cook despite her fear. She started going with Robert on his rounds, learning about the ranch and developing a particular affinity for the horses. She started playing with Daniel, the two of them becoming inseparable as they explored the ranch and invented elaborate games. One evening in April, almost 2 months after Lucy had arrived, Sarah found her standing at the window in her room looking out at the sunset. "Are you all right?" Sarah asked. Lucy turned, and for the first time Sarah saw something like peace in her eyes. "I think I am going to be," she said. "I still miss my parents every day. I still have bad dreams. But I think maybe I am starting to believe that I deserve to be happy again." "You do, sweetheart. You deserve all the happiness in the world." "Daniel told me you cannot have babies of your own," Lucy said carefully. "Is that why you adopted us?" Sarah considered how to answer, wanting to be honest but not wanting to make the children feel like second choices. "Your father and I talked about it when we found out I cannot have children. We decided that there are many ways to build a family." "Yes, part of the reason we adopted you and Daniel is because we could not have biological children. But that does not make you any less ours. You are not substitutes or replacements. You are exactly who you are meant to be, and we chose you specifically because we wanted you." "I am glad you chose us," Lucy said. "I know I have been difficult. You have been hurt, not difficult. There is a difference." That summer was one of the happiest of Sarah's life. Daniel was now 8 and thriving, running wild around the ranch with the dogs at his heels, learning everything he could from the ranch hands. Lucy, now 10, was becoming more confident, her nightmares less frequent, her smiles more genuine. Robert was happy in a way Sarah had never seen before, his loneliness replaced by the constant chaos and joy of children. But Sarah could not quite shake the feeling that their family was not yet complete. She watched Daniel and Lucy playing together and thought about how they had bonded over their shared trauma, how they helped each other heal. She thought about all the other children still waiting at Mrs. Henderson's establishment, all the other boys and girls who needed homes. "What would you think about one more?" she asked Robert one night as they lay in bed, listening to the sounds of the summer night through their open window. Robert laughed softly. "I was wondering when you would ask. I have been thinking the same thing. We have room, we have resources, and most importantly, we have love to give. Should we talk to the children first? Definitely. This is their home too. They should have a say." Daniel and Lucy were both enthusiastic about the idea of adding another sibling to their family. Lucy, in particular, seemed excited at the prospect of no longer being the only girl. They made the trip to Boise in August. All 4 of them crowded onto the wagon bench, laughing and telling stories the whole way. Mrs. Henderson greeted them like old friends. "Back again. At this rate, I will run out of children to place with you." We could only hope to give homes to so many, Sarah said with a smile. This time, Mrs. Henderson told them about a 5-year-old girl named Emma who had been found wandering alone near a mining camp. No one knew what had happened to her parents, and Emma herself could not or would not say. She had been with Mrs. Henderson for 3 months, silent and withdrawn, barely eating, never playing with the other children. She is deeply traumatized, Mrs. Henderson warned them. She may never speak again. She may never be quite right. I need you to understand that before you meet her. We understand, Sarah said. Can we see her? Emma was tiny for her age, with tangled dark hair and enormous gray eyes that looked at everything with a haunted awareness no child should have. She sat in the corner of the playroom, holding a rag doll and rocking slightly, not responding when Mrs. Henderson called her name. Lucy walked over to her slowly, crouching down to be at eye level. "Hi, Emma. My name is Lucy. I used to be really sad too. I used to not want to talk to anyone. These people help me feel better. They are nice. They might help you too." Emma looked at Lucy but said nothing, just continued to rock and clutch her doll. Daniel tried next, showing her a small carved horse that Robert had made him. "Look, I have a horse. When you come to the ranch, you can see real horses, big ones. They are really soft." Still nothing. Emma's eyes flicked to the horse, but she did not reach for it, did not respond. Robert and Sarah exchanged glances. This child was more damaged than either of the other two had been. Taking her in would be a bigger challenge, would require even more patience and love. But looking at that tiny, broken girl rocking in the corner, Sarah knew they could not walk away. "We will take her," Sarah said to Mrs. Henderson, "if she will come with us." The question was whether Emma would agree to leave, but when they prepared to go, when Mrs. Henderson gently told Emma that the Morrison family wanted to take her home with them, the little girl stood up and walked over to Lucy, taking her hand without a word. "I think that is a yes," Mrs. Henderson said with tears in her eyes. The journey home was quieter than the journey there. Emma sat on Lucy's lap, silent and still, clutching her doll. But she did not fight or cry, and when Lucy sang softly to her, she seemed to lean into the sound. Getting Emma settled at the ranch was a slow, delicate process. She slept in Lucy's room at first, seeming to find comfort in the older girl's presence. She ate very little and spoke not at all, but she followed Lucy everywhere, a tiny, silent shadow. Weeks passed with no change. Emma remained mute, responding to questions with nods or shakes of her head if she responded at all. Sarah began to worry that perhaps Mrs. Henderson had been right, that Emma's trauma ran too deep to heal. Then one day in September, Sarah was in the kitchen making bread when Emma wandered in. The little girl watched for a while, then came closer, reaching out tentatively to touch the dough. "Would you like to help?" Sarah asked gently. Emma nodded. Sarah guided her hands, showing her how to knead the dough, how to shape it into loaves. Emma worked intently, her small face serious with concentration. When they put the loaves in the oven, Sarah lifted Emma up to look through the glass door at the bread baking inside. "Mama," Emma whispered, so softly Sarah almost missed it. Sarah's breath caught. "What did you say, sweetheart?" "Mama used to make bread. I helped her." Emma's voice was rusty from disuse, but the words were clear. Sarah felt tears stream down her face as she hugged Emma close. "Would you like to help me make bread every week? We could do it together." Emma nodded against her shoulder, and then she started to cry, deep, wrenching sobs that she had been holding in for months. Sarah held her and cried with her, and when Robert and the other children came running at the sound, they all held each other, a family bound by love and loss and hope. After that day, Emma slowly began to emerge from her shell. She started talking more, telling fragments of stories about her parents and the life she had lost. She started playing with Daniel, their similar ages making them natural companions. She started calling Sarah Mama and Robert Papa, and neither of them corrected her, too grateful to hear her voice to care about technicalities. By Christmas, their family of 5 felt complete in a way Sarah had never imagined possible. They decorated the house together, with Emma and Daniel hanging popcorn strings while Lucy and Sarah baked cookies. Robert brought in the biggest tree he could find, and they decorated it with candles and ornaments and strings of cranberries. On Christmas morning, they exchanged modest gifts, but the real present was the laughter and love that filled the house. Emma squealed with delight over the new doll Sarah had sewn for her. Daniel treasured the leather satchel Robert had made him for carrying his school books. Lucy cried happy tears over the locket Sarah gave her, engraved with the words, "Forever our daughter." "I never thought I would be happy again," Lucy said as they all sat around the fire that evening. "After my parents died, I thought that was it. I thought I would be sad and scared forever. But this is happy. This is really, truly happy." "Me too," Daniel agreed. "I feel safe here. I feel like I belong." Emma climbed into Sarah's lap and snuggled close. "I love you, Mama and Papa and Lucy and Daniel. I love our family." "We love you too, sweetheart," Sarah said, her voice thick with emotion. "All of you. You have made our lives complete." Robert looked around at his family, his eyes shining with unshed tears. "4 years ago, I was alone in this house, convinced I would never be happy again. Elizabeth's death had broken something in me, and I did not know how to fix it. Then Sarah walked up that drive, looking for work, and everything changed. She taught me that hearts can heal, that love can grow again even after terrible loss. And now look at us. Look at this beautiful, chaotic, perfect family we have built together." "Then we filled our home another way," Sarah said softly, repeating the words Robert had said to her over a year ago. "And it is more beautiful than I ever imagined." The years that followed were not without challenges. Raising 3 children who had all experienced trauma took patience, wisdom, and an endless supply of love. Emma still had nightmares about whatever had happened to her parents. Lucy still panicked around fire. Daniel still tested boundaries and acted out when his grief overwhelmed him. But they worked through it together, as a family. Robert and Sarah learned as they went, making mistakes and apologizing and trying again. The children learned to trust, to open their hearts, to believe that this home was permanent and this love was real. Daniel grew into a strong, capable young man who loved the ranch and wanted to run it someday. Lucy discovered a gift for teaching and began helping the younger children in town with their lessons, earning money to save for college. Emma blossomed into a happy, talkative child who loved animals and wanted to be a veterinarian. When Daniel turned 18, Robert made him a full partner in the ranch. When Lucy turned 15, she began teaching at the small schoolhouse in Lewiston. When Emma turned 11, Robert bought her a calf of her own to raise and care for, but their family was not quite finished growing. In the spring of 1881, 5 years after Sarah had first arrived at the ranch, Mrs. Henderson sent them a letter. She had a teenage boy, 15 years old, who had been working on a ranch that went bankrupt. He had nowhere to go, and most families did not want an older child who would soon be out on his own anyway. Would the Morrisons consider giving him a home for a few years until he could get on his feet? The boy's name was Jacob, and he was sullen and defensive when they met him, convinced they were taking him in for cheap labor. But Daniel, now 14, and Lucy, now 16, worked together to break through his walls. They showed him that the Morrison ranch was different, that this family was real. Jacob softened slowly, responding to Robert's patient mentoring and Sarah's gentle affection. He became another brother to Daniel, Lucy, and Emma, another son to Robert and Sarah. He stayed not just until he was 18 but long after, becoming the ranch foreman and eventually marrying a girl from town and building a house on Morrison land for his own family. Through it all, Robert and Sarah's love deepened and grew. They had their disagreements, their frustrations, their moments of exhaustion when the children were overwhelming or the ranch work was too much. But they faced everything together, their partnership stronger for every challenge they overcame. On their 10th wedding anniversary in March of 1886, Robert gave Sarah a new locket to replace the one he had given her that first Christmas. This one was larger, with room for 5 tiny photographs: Daniel, Lucy, Emma, Jacob, and a space in the center for the two of them. "Our family," he said as he fastened it around her neck. "Complete and perfect just as it is." "I never imagined I could be this happy," Sarah said, touching the locket gently. "When Thomas died, when I learned I could not have children, I thought my life was over. I thought I would never have the family I dreamed of, but this is better than anything I imagined. These children, this life, all of it is more than I ever dared to hope for." "We built something beautiful," Robert agreed. "Not the way we expected, not the way most people do it, but ours and perfect for us." They stood on the porch of the ranch house, watching their children play in the yard. Daniel was teaching Emma to rope a fence post. Lucy was reading to Jacob from a book of poetry. The dogs were barking and chasing each other in circles. The sun was setting over the mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink. "Tell me," Sarah said, leaning into Robert's embrace, "do you ever regret it, not having children of your own blood?" Robert was quiet for a moment, considering the question seriously. "No," he finally said. "These children are mine in every way that matters. I was there for their first days in this house, for their nightmares and their triumphs. I taught them to ride and work and be good people. They carry my name and my values. They will inherit this ranch and everything I have built. What more could biological children give me?" "Nothing," Sarah agreed. "They are ours, completely and totally ours." As the years continued to pass, their children grew into remarkable adults. Daniel married a rancher's daughter from a neighboring property and gave Robert and Sarah their first grandchildren, twin boys who spent their summers at Morrison Ranch learning the trade from their grandfather. Lucy went to Teachers College in Boise and came back to establish a real school in Lewiston, serving children throughout the valley. She never married, content with her career and her family, but she adopted a child of her own, a little girl she named Sarah. Emma became the first female veterinarian in Idaho Territory, studying in the East but returning home to practice. She married a doctor from Lewiston, and together they served their community for decades. Jacob ran Morrison Ranch alongside Daniel, the two men as close as any blood brothers, their children growing up together on the land their parents had built. Robert and Sarah grew old together, their hair turning gray, their bodies slowing down, but their love never dimming. They spent their later years in rocking chairs on that same porch, watching their children and grandchildren, and eventually great-grandchildren run and play in the yard. One evening in the summer of 1906, 30 years after Sarah had first walked up that long drive looking for work, Robert took her hand as they sat watching the sunset. "Do you remember what I said to you that day you told me you could not have children?" he asked. "You said we would fill our home another way," Sarah replied, the memory as clear as if it had happened yesterday. "And we did. Look at what we built, Sarah. 4 children of our own, 9 grandchildren, 3 great-grandchildren so far. A ranch that is prospering, a name that means something in this community, a legacy of love and acceptance and second chances. All because you were brave enough to tell me the truth and I was wise enough to see that biology does not make a family. We were both brave, Sarah corrected gently. We both chose love over fear. We both chose to open our hearts even though we had been hurt. That is what made this possible. Robert lifted her hand to his lips and kissed it gently. I love you, Sarah Morrison. You are the best decision I ever made. I love you too, Robert Morrison. Thank you for seeing me, for loving me, for building this beautiful life with me. They sat in comfortable silence as the sun set on another day, surrounded by the sounds of family and home and love. The ranch that had once been so quiet, so full of loneliness and loss, now rang with laughter and life. The house that had been just a structure was now truly a home, filled with the people they had chosen to love and who had chosen to love them back. Sarah thought back to that terrified young widow who had arrived in Lewiston with nothing but a carpetbag and a broken heart. She thought about all the turns her life had taken, all the pain and joy and unexpected blessings. She thought about Thomas, her first husband, and hoped he would be happy for her, happy that she had found love and family again. But mostly she thought about Robert and the 4 children who had made her a mother. She thought about the grandchildren who called her grandma and climbed into her lap for stories. She thought about the great-grandchildren, the newest generation of Morrisons, carrying on the legacy of love that she and Robert had started. When Robert passed away peacefully in his sleep in 1908, at the age of 63, he was surrounded by his entire family. Sarah held his hand as he took his last breath, and though her heart broke at losing him, she found comfort in knowing he had died happy, fulfilled, and deeply loved. She lived another 5 years after Robert, watched over by her children and grandchildren, never alone, always cherished. When she passed in 1913, at the age of 59, it was in the same bed where she had slept beside Robert for so many years, in the house they had filled with love and laughter. They buried her next to Robert on a hill overlooking the ranch, under a tree they had planted together 40 years before. The entire community came to pay their respects to the woman who had touched so many lives, who had shown them all what family truly meant. Daniel stood at his mother's grave with his siblings, all of them now middle-aged with children of their own. She saved us, he said quietly. All of us. She and Dad took us in when we had nothing, gave us everything, and never asked for anything in return except that we love each other. They showed us what real love looks like, Lucy agreed, tears streaming down her face. Not the easy kind, but the kind that chooses you every single day, the kind that does not give up. I am going to tell my children about them, Emma said. About how Mama could not have babies of her own, but she became the best mother anyone could ask for. About how Dad could have remarried someone who could give him biological children, but he chose to build a family a different way. Their story matters. Their legacy lives on in all of us, Jacob added. In every choice we make to love instead of fear, to include instead of exclude, to build instead of tear down. That is what they taught us. The Morrison Ranch continued to prosper for generations, passed down through Daniel's line, but always open to all the children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren of Robert and Sarah's chosen family. The house remained a gathering place, a home base for a family that had started with 2 lonely, grieving people who found each other and chose to love. And if you had asked anyone in Lewiston, Idaho, they would have told you that the Morrison family was the finest example of what the West could be at its best. Not perfect, not without struggle, but real and loving and true. A testament to the power of second chances, to the strength of chosen family, to the truth that home is not about blood or biology, but about the people you choose to love and who choose to love you back. Sarah's last words, whispered to her children gathered around her bed, became the family motto. Love makes a family. Nothing more, nothing less, nothing else. And in the end, that was the truth that sustained them all. That was the legacy that outlasted buildings and land and money. Love made their family. Love filled their home. And love, in the end, was everything that mattered. The Morrison Ranch stood for another 100 years, through world wars and depressions and changing times. The house was eventually turned into a museum, preserving the story of Robert and Sarah Morrison, and the family they built. Visitors came from all over to hear the tale of the lonely rancher and the grieving widow who found each other in the Idaho Territory in 1876, who faced the heartbreak of infertility, not with despair but with creativity and love. School children visited on field trips and learned about adoption and foster care, and the many ways that families can form. Couples struggling with infertility came and found hope in the story of Sarah's confession and Robert's response. Adoptive families came to see where it all started, to connect with a history that validated their own experiences. The locket Robert had given Sarah, with its 5 tiny photographs, was displayed in a place of honor in the museum. Beside it was the original silver locket from that first Christmas, the one with the 2 sparrows in flight. Together, they told the story better than any words could. 2 people alone becoming 2 people together, becoming a family of 6, becoming a legacy of love that would last forever. And sometimes, on quiet evenings when the museum was closed and the sun was setting over the mountains, visitors swore they could feel something special in that old house. Not ghosts exactly, but a presence. A feeling of warmth and welcome and home. A reminder that love is not limited by circumstances or biology, that family is what you make it, and that sometimes the most beautiful stories are the ones written not by fate but by choice. Robert and Sarah Morrison chose each other. They chose their children. They chose to fill their home with love in whatever form it came. And that choice, made over and over again through years of joy and sorrow, created something that death could not end and time could not diminish. Their story became the story of the ranch, of the town, of everyone who heard it and recognized something of themselves in it. It became a story of hope for anyone who had ever felt broken, ever thought their dreams were impossible, ever feared they were not enough. Because in the end, Robert and Sarah proved that love is always enough. That family can be found and made and chosen. That home is not a place but a feeling, built not through bloodlines but through commitment and care and the daily choice to show up for each other. And that legacy, that truth, that love would echo through generations, a light in the darkness for anyone who needed to hear it. Then we will fill our home another way. And they did, beautifully, completely, and forever.